Hi guys, Andrew Davidson here, and welcome back to another As Per My Ability video. In this video, I'm joined with my buddy Brad,
Hey,
and Brad's going to be helping me talk about a game that we just finished not too long ago, and it's a campaign game, and it's called Lord of the Rings: Journeys in Middle Earth. Now, I'm going to ramble a little bit about the game first before Brad and I get into our discussion. As I've said, we have completed the entire thing. We have come from start to finish. We played, believe you played Legolas, and I played. Who did I play?
Elena.
Elena. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we're going to be basically in this video. Excuse me. We're going to be giving our impressions. I've got about 6 bullet points that we're going to just kind of throw out some questions and talk about and give kind of a review of the game. So, Lord of the Rings: Journeys in Middle Earth is by Fantasy Flight. It was released 2 years ago, I believe, and it basically models the same gameplay style to some degree, and we'll talk about the differences in our actual discussion, as another Fantasy Flight game called Mansions of Madness. There are some fundamental differences between the two, which again we'll talk about, but it does operate the same way in regards to it's a cooperative game and it's a scenario-based game. And this one's a campaign. We played through 13 games. I think we were talking before we started recording that there's probably more scenarios that you could play. So I'm going to just flat off start off the video by saying we lost our campaign. So we'll just get that right out of the way, expressed. But hopefully that won't reflect on any false negativity just because we got to the end and we ended up suffering quite badly. At least I did. My character did. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. That's going to be the game plan is Lord of the Rings: Journeys in Middle Earth by Fantasy Flight Games. Brad, I will say as a caveat, has not played Mansions of Madness, specifically second edition. So I'll be the one to kind of jump in and do the whole compare contrast and things like that. But hopefully Brad and I will get a game of Mansions of Madness in at some point one of these days, and so you'll have a little more of a juxtaposition between the two games. So Lord of the Rings, the first off thing that I want to talk about is the overall story. So the overall just campaign narrative. What did you think of just the narrative? Brad, we'll just go ahead and start.
I found it pretty interesting. Um, I like the journey of the whole thing, which I guess probably follows with Lord of the Rings, journeying around. Um,
Oh,
I think.
I
Oh,
should
go ahead.
also interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. I should interrupt that Brad, just to say that Brad is not a Lord of the Rings buff. Um, so which is fair. It's a fair assumption, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like you haven't. I remember you commented you haven't seen all the movies, or you've seen parts of movies. You haven't read the books or anything like that. So we'll
Right.
kind of just put that out there just for fans or anyone watching to be able to kind of contextualize where we're coming at. I have not read the books, but I watch the movies pretty much every year, sometimes twice a year, and things like that. So anyways, sorry to interrupt you, but we'll just get that out of the way. The story, what did you think of the story?
I enjoyed the story quite a bit. Thought it was interesting how, being a campaign style game, we carried on from one scenario to the next. That went pretty well. I thought the story flowed pretty well and gave us, at one point it even gave us a little side quest we could go on, which, I said, yeah, let's go for it, even though, you weren't a big fan of going for it because it didn't make a lot of sense. But I said, we're playing a game, let's do it. So
And then we
I
got
thought
rocked.
yeah, we did, but but no, I found the story enjoyable. it fit thematically with what we were doing. The characters fit well,
Okay.
with all of that. So I enjoyed it.
Did it feel Lord of the Rings to you?
Well, as much of the Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings as I know, I think it did a little bit. But I'm just not, like you said, I'm not a huge buff on the story, so I couldn't say um, real finely that it was in tune with the Lord of the Rings.
So one of the big criticisms that I've at least seen on YouTube or YouTubers is that the Lord of the Rings game basically could have been anything. You could have reskinned it to be any other kind of like adventure type game from Indiana Jones. I think someone even threw out Twilight or something like that. Yeah, and so their big critique, I think it was no pun intended. I don't quote me, but I think it was them that they were saying this really doesn't feel like a Lord of the Rings game. And so for people that are watching that are Lord of the Rings buffs or fans or that just enjoy the movies and the books and things like that, this game is not the movies, is not the books. I played a character, Elena. Now, again, I have not read the books, but she's not even in the movies. And there are some characters that you meet along the way and some bad guys and villains, not even in the movies. Maybe in the books. I don't know. So when when people buy this game, which is a hefty game going around anywhere between $80 to $100, people are expecting this would be really fun to play through like a Lord of the Rings movie. And it's not quite that. It's kind of Lord of the Rings, what they call adjacent, right? Kind of like the Star Wars, like Rogue One. Like it's a Star Wars story, but it's not really, the main Star Wars story that people know. So this is kind of a misnomer. It is Lord of the Rings, Journeys to Middle Earth. So, but it's kind of Lord of the Rings adjacent. It's telling a story that's within the Lord of the Rings world. Yes, there are orcs. Yes, there are goblins, and yes, you played Legolas, which is in the movie and the books and things like that. But it's really not. It's kind of a misnomer. So one thing to put out there for people that might be interested in picking it up is you're not going to be like playing through the movies. You're just going to be playing kind of within the world. Having said that, on my end of the aspect, the story to me didn't seem really too like put together. Now, we played 13 games. We played about one game a week. I know there was one week where we doubled up and we played two games. So that might attribute to the fact that it took us not forever, but it took us a long time to play through the whole story. But a lot of it seemed kind of like, okay, and I'm going to make stuff up because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone out there, but you come across this group and you either do this or this, but then they run away from you and then you're trying to chase after them and then you meet something else, but then they end up in this one spot. And to me, I really couldn't tell you, like, if I had to sit down and tell someone the entire story, I don't even really know. It seemed kind of fragmented until the end. I think the ending, I don't know, 2 or 3 scenarios definitely threw down the like, here's the big bad guy, this is what's trying to happen, this is what we're trying to stop, here's what we're trying to get to. Hopefully that's a fair assessment, but the first third of the game seemed kind of just like you're just meandering on, going on here or there or whatever. So I didn't find this story because I play a lot of story games, so I have a lot to kind of contrast, to juxtaposition it with, and I didn't find it to be super engaging, just for the fact that like I couldn't even tell you what the story was. What was it that we were doing in chapter 3? I don't even know, and like stuff like that. So I would say kind of meh on the story. Brad thought that the story went really well, connected really well. I think that could be mitigated if you, I don't know, don't have a life or don't have a job, and you could play maybe once a day, kind of like binge watching a show where everything's still really fresh. But because we took time off and played in between or once a week, I played a lot of games in between then, and Brad possibly, played a lot of games in between then too. And so you kind of like end up with that, what happened last week kind of thing, where they go like previously on Lost or whatever, and they kind of refresh you. And so that didn't really happen. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, we're trying to find some injured character who's wandered off and we need to go find that person. Okay, cool, whatever. That's what we have to do this week. And so the overall campaign, I'd say it was probably not the best that I have played. But I know, Brad, you're kind of a self-admitted Euro gamer. And so
Right.
story games is kind of like a new thing for you. So the second thing I want to talk about is the difficulty. We talked about this off mic. We played 13 games. We won 8 and lost 5. So what do you think about that? What did you think about the difficulty?
Boy, it seemed like some scenarios we had a lot of trouble with, and I don't know if that was necessarily because we hit, we had poor draws or, just didn't do things quite right. But I don't know. I could think of one scenario. I'm not going to really talk about it too much, but I remember it felt like we just got wailed on, and there was no no chance of us winning it. And then some scenarios seemed like pretty passable. Now it's hard to say again. Is that because we drew well? Because we played well? Do we hit all the combination of things just right? It really seemed scenario dependent to me on
Okay.
how well, on how difficult it was. But and yeah, I don't know. I just felt like some of the ones on the big journey maps, it was
Yeah.
really hard to tell how it was going to go. And when you were actually, sometimes we'd win a game and it just felt like, oh, I guess we did what we needed to do. We didn't even know how close we were. That happened, seemed to me, a few scenarios. And then some, it just, like I mentioned, it was, oh, maybe we don't have a chance here, So, um,
Right.
yeah.
I was gonna comment on that as well. The journey maps. So there's two different types for those that haven't played. There's two different maps. There's a journey map, which is kind of a zoomed out view of kind of the world. Think of like Civilization, like Sid Meier's Civilization. And then there's battle maps, which is zoomed in, like a Memoir 44 or some other kind of tactical miniatures game, maybe Warhammer. I don't know. And so you'll kind of jump and bebop between the two styles, I guess, of play. One of them being more of a D&D, kind of zoomed in with your characters. And I almost thought that the journey maps were incredibly like more difficult than the battle maps. Now, again, memory is subjective. I'm not really sure, but the moments that I took pictures of and was like, oh my gosh, I think they were all journey maps. And there was one particular scenario where we there's a particular timer in the game, kind of a threat timer, and we were like 1 point away, and Brad ended up just being able to do something to like get to a boat and like get us out of there, like literally, like, this is your last turn, final move. And that was a journey map. And then there were some other times where my character was just surrounded by different types of enemies and stuff. And then they have ranged enemies where it's just like, man, I'm taking so much damage. And like Brad played a character, Legolas, obviously, that's a little bit more combat oriented and stuff like that. So in regards to the difficulty, I thought it was fairly balanced in regards to they gave you some ups and some downs. It wasn't just like, holy cow, this is hard all the way through. And I'll throw out a game to kind of contextualize that. Arkham Horror, the living card game. There are some campaigns that I've played through because I do talk about it a lot on my channel. That's just like, this is absolutely the highest difficulty for the whole campaign. There's one called The Forgotten Age that myself and Shanine, who's on As Per My Ability, we basically just kind of quit. At one point, we got about halfway through and was like, lost. We lost that one, and we were just like, oh, this is way too hard. So having kind of that to go off of, I thought it was a good balance of like, okay, this scenario, we're going to throw a lot of enemies at you. And the next scenario, it won't be so much enemies. It'll be more based on exploration, going to like certain areas, searching, doing skill related checks in order to win the game. Or, sorry, skill related checks in order to win the scenario. And then others were more combat related to win the scenario. So I thought there was a good balance between that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the balance was good. It just seemed to me that, like I mentioned, there was one scenario where it felt unbeatable to me, and then there's probably a couple that were going to be almost winnable no matter what. So
Are you
I think
referring to like a later scenario?
no, it was well, it's kind of in the middle. It's one where we got in the cave and we had no way of
Okay. All
right.
right.
It was just like I didn't see any chance of us winning that at all. Um, but other than
Yeah, we
that,
got
like
hosed.
other than that one, I suppose it seems pretty good. I think you're right. Balance on the different if it was enemies or skill checks or whatever it might be. Um, and yeah, that I thought the one worked out perfectly for us. The one you talked about, very last move, our threat timer was going to be done. That was a great game.
That
I
was
really,
yeah, it was a
really enjoyed
stand-up
that.
moment. We were just at the end, we were
Yeah,
just like, yes.
yeah,
It was like basically like shot half court shot at the buzzer kind of thing for sports fans. Like we were just like, yeah, that's awesome. So I've already mentioned, so we won 8 and we lost 5. My next question would be, do you feel that that they were all winnable? Like the ones that, well, okay, all right, we already talked about the cave type thing. Putting that one aside, do you feel like we had a chance to win the ones that we lost?
I do. Yeah,
Good.
um,
Yeah.
yeah. I thought that was. I thought they were all winnable. Definitely, if we'd done a couple things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also feel like a couple. We lost like the first two scenarios, and then we won the next two, if I'm remembering correctly. And I almost feel like part of the first two is just they're trying to get you into this game and whatever and learn it, and I think part of it was me not under or not doing things quite the right way or the most effectively or efficiently, and so plus your deck isn't super efficient early in the game either. But we'll probably get to that as we talk along. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, we will. So we'll move on to the next one. Number 3 that I have on my little list here, and I'm just going to read it verbatim what I wrote down. So number 3 is app integration question mark. Was app integration needed? Could the game be designed without the app and still be good?
boy,
So
I
let's
think
talk about the app. So for those of you, like I mentioned at the top, this game requires an app to play. So you need to download on your phone or on a tablet or on a computer. You absolutely have to have an electronic device to play.
yeah, I think the app definitely streamlines anything. If we had to handle all of the bookkeeping of the game, that
Right.
without the app, I think that'd be kind of a complexity nightmare. I think, well, maybe not complexity nightmare. It'd just be so much extra going on between all the things that you're doing. I think it's necessary, and I wouldn't even. I don't think I'd even want to try the game without. If we had to handle all those things outside of what we were already doing in the game.
So thumbs up for the app.
Thumbs up that it's needed. Thumbs up. I think the app is good. There's a couple things in it that I think could be improved. And
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the interface, which we can talk about if
right.
you want, but I'll throw my kind of ideas out there. So this is coming off of Mansions of Madness, which works very, very much the same in regards to having an app that tells you what tiles to place out, tells you what enemies get spawned and how they move, like kind of what Brad was saying with the bookkeeping aspect. that part's fine. That's not even the part that really shines for me. The part that really shines for me, especially with this Lord of the Rings game, not necessarily so much with Mansions of Madness, at least not that I've experienced yet, and I have a lot more Mansions of Madness to experience, that's for sure. But the story, there's a lot of narrative, and I know Brad was operating the computer and reading the story. I think that that is just paramount to me. Being a story game, being a campaign game, the story just being able to pop up and you can read it on the computer or on your tablet or whatever, as opposed to like having a story book and like flipping to pages, like a lot of like Ryan Lockett games. Like, I'm not bad mouthing Ryan Lockett. I love Near and Far, but it is like you flip to 151 and read this or whatever. Here, the app kind of just assesses where we were at, like how we lost or how we won, and gave us like a story and you could read it. I thought like that just speeds everything up and just gets rid of having just a giant book of like, okay, well, we died, and so we go to page 123, or we won, so we go to page 179 or something like that. It's able to just do that. So that's why I kind of praise the app, and that's what this app does that Mansions of Madness doesn't necessarily do quite as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of on the same page with you with the app. It spawns the monsters. It handles all the bookkeeping. That's really great. A game out there that is won a bunch of awards from a couple years ago, Gloomhaven, is a game that I think should have used an app, because I've played Gloomhaven a couple of times at the time of recording this, and it does. It's like everyone has their initiative, but then one player has to do all the bookkeeping and being like, okay, this goblin moves this way and attacks, and here's how I do the attack. Okay, this skeleton is going to move this way. So like one person has to do all the bookkeeping, and I feel like Gloomhaven really missed out on the Fantasy Flight idea of having an app handle all that stuff for you. It just really speeds up the game. And Gloomhaven, for those of you that don't know, I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's already a beast to like set up and play in regards to like the duration and everything like that. So I think it's pretty much thumbs up on that bullet point for both of us. The app was great. The integration problem, or the GUI system or whatever, we had some issues because, especially with me, I had some cards that I could use in response to things where the app was like, I'm not allowed to, right? Like interrupt what it's doing to be able to apply my card, because my card's like, oh, hey, this triggers so I can use it. And so we almost had to kind of wait until it opened up to allow us to be able to apply damages or move things or whatever. And we had to just, like you said, I remember a few times you're like, we'll just have to remember to do this when we get to that spot. So the integration part of it could have been a little better. I know there was one part where Brad accidentally like clicked through something or clicked something and was like, oh, whoops, I didn't mean to select that option or something.
Yeah.
And it would have been nice to have like a back feature or like whoops, go back a page kind of thing. But the integration of, or not the integration, the user interface of it doesn't allow you to really back out a whole lot in case you accidentally click too far, because I think that's what happened, right? You like accidentally just clicked a little too far and was like, whoa, wait, oh crap, I already clicked on something. So the idea of the app implementation pretty high for both of us. However, the user interaction, I should say, could have been a little better. I think we're in agreement on that one. Yes. Okay, so we'll move on to the actual gameplay. So I'm going to say, what did you think of the gameplay? More specifically, how did you feel that the combat works? Because this is a completely diceless game. There's no wait. Are there dice? No, there's no dice. Like combat's all done by kind of flipping cards and
Hmm.
getting successes and things like that, which is unlike Mansions of Madness, where combat is all just dice rolls. You can modify your dice rolls and mitigate some blanks and stuff like that by using tokens, which there is in this game as well. There's like fate and inspiration that you can turn things into successes. But what did you think about the gameplay in specific to mostly the combat?
Well, I think the combat was pretty similar to any of the skill checks. I mean, they're all pretty much the same.
Okay.
I enjoyed it because the Eurogamer in me doesn't think dice are friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and the other part of it is I was able to upgrade my deck. You probably noticed right away as soon as I was able to make my deck as efficient as possible, or I was always working at making a more efficient deck, getting rid of cards that weren't going to be successes in combat. Even the ones
Right.
that you know were that you had to use the fate cards, where you have to use the inspiration tokens. Um, I kind of weighed those, at a certain rate, and even tried to maybe get rid of a few of those, just to have a very efficient deck. So I enjoyed that. I thought the combat worked well. Um, I guess it maybe in some ways it felt a little samey after a while, but um, I think
Mm-hmm.
overall it was done implemented pretty well.
Yeah, another, I guess, critical review is the samey aspect of you just flipping over cards. Skill check, flip over cards. Oh, I got two or I got one. Combat, flip over cards. I got one or I got two, and that could be kind of samey. Um, the dice aspect. So we got this polarization going on in this video because I'm an Amerithrash gamer. Is kind of where I got my start. Brad has already self-admittedly said he's kind of a Euro gamer, and so we've got these two kind of polars here. I almost like the Mansions of Madness, the dice. I like chucking the dice. I like that there is mitigation in the dice. You can change things and stuff. I kind of prefer that just because that's the Ameritrash gamer gamer that I am. So just flipping over the cards and not having dice, yeah, it's okay, but it's not as exciting to me. Now, one fundamental difference between you and I that I noticed as we played through is I noticed that you, and this is probably akin to the Eurogamer part, because I never really did this. I think I tried to and then just forgot right away. But you looked through your deck, like before we started a game or in between games. You looked through and you counted how I have, like, let's say 6 successes in my deck. And so when we were doing skill checks, you were like always running the odds of, like, because when you do when you do one, it's in a discard pile. You don't get to refresh until the end of the round. And so I noticed you were kind of card counting
Yeah.
in a way, whereas I wasn't really. I think I tried to do that once and then I just totally forgot where my number was at. But you were always like, okay, well, I only have, like, let's say 7 successes and I've already burned through 3 of them, so there's a pretty good, like, a likelihood. And so you were doing a lot of, like, kind of statistical type things with, can I succeed or can I not, whereas I was just kind of more like, well, let's do it, let's go for it and see what I get. And so
Sure.
maybe that's why I kind of prefer some dice combat. It just seems more exciting to me, and why you would probably prefer, like you said, dice aren't really your friends, or are not your friends all the time, because you can apply that sort of statistical kind of thing to it or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you can with dice to a point too, but I don't know. There's something to about dice to me, and I'm sure a lot of people always feel the same way. It's like you never feel like you roll the odds. Um, but I think that's because we tend to remember when we don't do so well when we're rolling versus when we're kind
Mm-hmm.
of getting an average amount of, or what statistically we probably should get out of the dice. So
Well, ever since the origin of like combat, like let's take Risk for example, which came out in 1952 in France. You know, it's always been whenever you have combat, you've got dice rolling. It's just
mhm.
dice roll, dice roll, dice roll, and so I think people maybe are accustomed to that, especially when it comes to combat things. Now, skill checks are in this game. Don't get me wrong, but there's combat as well. There's definitely a lot of combat, especially in some scenarios. And there's some big baddies that show up that you definitely have to do a lot of combat with. And so I think this idea of like, let's get rid of the dice and use cards to be able to come up with a number, like who wins or who doesn't, or if you succeed or if you don't succeed. Another game that does this is the Game of Thrones board game. So the Game of Thrones board game is kind of like Risk with like military stuff and area control, but there are no dice involved. And that's another game that I'm kind of critical of, where it's like I kind of want there to be some dice checking when it comes to combat, because maybe it just brings out that Risk feeling in me from a kid. I know I played Risk growing up. I'm not sure what your history of playing Risk is or
I've
whatnot.
I've
Never.
played it two or three times in my life.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So
I played it before I even became like an adult and started being a serious gamer. I played it quite a few times with like my family and friends and stuff like that. So maybe some of that's just ingrained in me, but the gameplay overall, I'd say is fine. The dice thing is the only thing that I would prefer that you say you're fine with. But the way that it moves, the action points, which you get 2 actions, I really enjoy the fact that you can take a move action, interrupt the move action to do another action, and then carry out the rest of your move points, your movement points. I really like that a lot. God, what game was that I playing? I was playing a game recently that specifically forbids that. Like once you you lose, what game was it? Oh, rats. Where I was just like, you get 3 movement points, but the moment you do another action, you lose all of your movement points. Oh, it was Back to the
Back to the
Future. It
Future.
was that
Yep.
Back to the
Yep.
Future, Back in Time game. Um, and so that was kind of a bummer to me, the Back to the Future thing, because I was so like, I like this. I like being able to like move, do something, like twiddle around with something or search something and then be able to move again. That was really cool. So gameplay, we really like the gameplay of the game for the most part. The dice rolling is probably the only part where you and I would maybe disagree. So number 5, I have you've already commented on, and it's basically I have written down the leveling up system. So in the game as you play, which we had a little bit of a snafu with our campaign in regards to leveling and stuff. The game does allow you to collect what's called lore, and the lore points dictate on when you can level up your cards. So you stick with what you kind of start with, but you get better versions of what you have. You get a better bow or better. I had a harp for my character, and they're basically just better versions of these cards. You also get some, I think they're called boons in the game. They're just like we had a brooch or whatever that the whole party can use. And those get better as you collect more lore in the game. It's basically kind of experience. You're just learning more about the world, and then you can upgrade. So there is an upgrade system. The game does get harder. It does allow your characters to get better. Brad, you've already kind of gotten into this. You really enjoyed that aspect. The moment when we were like, oh, hey, we can swap out all this stuff was just like, that was a good day for you.
Yeah.
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 Well, I'm just all about I mean, whether you have a deck builder or whatever, I love when I play a deck building game, I can call out my bad cards and replace with good cards. And um, so that part of the game had to do with experience based on if you won scenarios or not. You get 4 experience points. The team would, each person would get 4 if we won a scenario. We'd get 3 if we lost a scenario. Then the lore points were for our actual
Oh,
weapons
right.
and armor.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you for making that distinction.
And so I actually enjoyed both of them. The thing I don't know how they would necessarily fix this, but we only were able to upgrade. Well, I was only able to upgrade my weapons and my armor one time the
One
whole
time. Yeah.
scenario. I feel like maybe if I could have done that a couple times, that would have been a little more exciting, and they could have
Yeah.
ramped the game up. Um, the upgrading of the actual, I don't know what they call the skill cards, I guess. Yep,
Your
upgrading
deck.
my deck with the skill cards, that I enjoyed quite a bit because not only was I allowed to add cards, but they let me take out the other cards that I had added earlier that weren't quite as
Hmm.
good, and I really
Yeah.
liked that. I really enjoyed that. That making my deck efficient, I thought was a really nice thing.
Yeah. You could like sell off two of your level 3 cards to get like a level 9 card or whatever. And
Yeah.
so you get rid of the junky kind of cards. Yeah, that was definitely fun. And as a role player, I enjoy the fact of like getting better equipment. Which you're right that there's a distinction. The lore can get your up weapons to be upgraded, and then the experience is to upgrade your deck, I guess, that you
Hmm.
draw from. So those are two different things. But on both hands, I like both of them. I agree with Brad. I wish we would have been able to upgrade more than once. We kind of had one big, like huge upgrade, especially with our equipment. Um, with our deck, we had kind of a slow increment of like getting up to those 12 cost cards, which was just kind of a slow burn, which was fine, I guess. But on the equipment side with the lore, we did one huge upgrade. And I agree with you. I felt like, man, two or three times or a second or a third time would have really been awesome. We may have won the whole campaign, which, as I said, we did not. So we've already kind of covered the leveling system, and so the final thing that I just want to basically put down is final thoughts, overall thoughts, anything you want to say, any category, anything about the game at all. Like, would you play it again? Would you not play it again? Would you recommend it to? Who would you recommend it to? What kind of a grade would you give it, or whatever?
Okay.
Anything.
Um, well, I think I am sitting at, if I was to do out of 10 points, it's probably around an 8 or so to me. I really enjoyed the game.
Hmm.
Um, one thing, I don't, I guess you were able to replay the base campaign, but it had been a year or so, so that probably played into that. You didn't remember quite as much.
Right.
So, I would definitely be willing to go through another campaign, get an expansion of some sort and
Which
do
there is
that.
one.
Yeah. And so I would enjoy doing that. One thing we didn't do is we didn't change our roles from scenario to scenario. And I think that was more to do with we just didn't want to kind of get used to different things or take the time to redo our decks and things like that. So,
Mm.
maybe that would be something to explore. But I wouldn't mind playing through again with another character, a different character. I don't know how it would go if we didn't have at least one combat heavy character though, because it seems like
Yeah.
there's a lot of big baddies that can pop up throughout that game, and I think that might be difficult to um, mitigate those monsters.
Yeah.
Um, what else? I would say, um, I don't know how much the story would change, so that's probably not that big of a deal. But
Yeah, I didn't
I,
feel like there was a whole lot of branching narrative, like where we would do something and be like, okay, you are now headed down this rabbit hole. It was more of just kind of, you're going to end up where you're going to end up. It just depends on whether if you want to go this way and do this quest or this way, like you mentioned earlier. There was one call that you made that kind of took us off the beaten path, so to speak. But I never really got the sense of like we're on a whole new story because we went this way as opposed to like we're going this way. There is one scenario where you have to kind of join a side where we pledge our allegiance to this something, and again, spoilers, not trying to spoil, but like, or we would pledge our allegiance towards against them. Maybe that would have brought about different things. I'm not really sure, but it didn't give me the overall feeling of like these super big branching narrative paths. So playing it again, sure, with another character would be fun just to see how that character plays and what happens. But the base set, I don't know if I would really play through it again. But I guess the question I have for you is: there is at the time of recording this, there is another expansion, or there's an expansion for it, which I believe provides a whole new campaign. It's like 13 games or something like that. I think you would be willing to try it, but that's not my question. My question is, do you like the game enough to go out of your way to play it? Meaning buying it, purchasing it on Amazon, and playing it. Would you go out of your way?
Well, I think part of it is I'm too much of a bargain hunter, so I don't know that I would go out of my way to buy the expansion at full price. It would be one of those things where if I saw a decent deal on it, I'd probably buy it
So
and give it a shot. But I'm probably not willing to do it at full price or anything like that.
so you're stoked enough about the game to say, hey, if I can find this at the right price, I'll totally get back into this game. As opposed to like, I've played it, I've experienced it, I came, I saw, I didn't conquer, and now it's just over with. Like I have games like that. I don't really want to throw any designers or any games under the bus, but there are some campaign games where it's like I'm done. Nothing against the game. Okay, I'll throw one out. I apologize, Jerry Hawthorne. Stuff Fables. Stuff Fables is like a great campaign game. I'm never going to play it again. I'm just not. It's like, it's a book that you read that you're like, okay, it was okay when I read it, but I will probably not read it again.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't go out of my way to read, like if they put out maybe a module for it or some type of mini expansion, I probably won't. He's got some other ones like Comonauts and Aftermath that I'm not going to comment on because those are a little they're more variable and stuff, and so I don't think I'm finished with those games. But there are some games like Stuff Fables where you just kind of consume what they have, and you're like, I'm done. It was fine, and I'm done. I really don't have any desire to come back to the game. So if you had the right opportunity, the expansion, you would definitely continue on. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. One thing I think would be interesting in the game too is, in those adventure maps, there was a lot of search tokens that were out there that we tended to ignore just for the purpose of getting through the game. And I still don't have a great feel on how many of those we should have chased down, if they were really red herrings. So for that reason, I might even play the base campaign again. I would be willing to give it a shot just to see if I chase some more of those down, if that give you more lore, maybe reduce. I don't think it would reduce the threat, but and maybe if you got more lore, then we could upgrade the weapons and things one more time or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
which would be great.
Yeah.
So who would you recommend this game for? Well, first of all, actually, let me start. We'll get to that question. Do you think this would be a good solo game? Because I know you're kind of a solo gamer. Would you recommend this for someone who's like, I'm a solo gamer? And you can, by the way, play this solo.
Right. I don't know if the story is enough to carry it solo. The story, the sort of is fine for me. Boy, I don't know. I don't know if I'd play it solo. I'd much rather have somebody there to kind of go through it with me, and I don't think I'd want to handle more than one character at the same time.
I agree. Well, you can play with you can't play with one character. The book specifically says, and in the app you have to pick at least two characters. So when I first got the game years ago and played a little bit of it solo, I was kind of what they call double fisting, and I was playing two characters. So for those of you out there that are thinking, because I just said this is a solo game, and you're like, I'm a solo gamer, you do have to play with two characters. It's required. It just flat out it is. And so I agree with Brad. I have played this solo, and I did get, I don't even know, halfway through the campaign, and it was just kind of samey because you're just sitting at a table flipping cards and scouting and resetting your deck, and you're just kind of doing that all on your own. You know, you have the TV playing in the distance or something, but it's better when you've got some people around the table to be like, I'm going to move my character here and you can do this, and it makes it a much more enjoyable experience. So okay, that aside, let's go back to the actual question of like who would you recommend this game for?
I think, but I don't know. I mean, you're saying, some Lord of the Ring fans probably weren't
Yeah.
real pumped up on the story because it was adjacent and not really part of the story. So I really think Lord of the Rings fans who could deal with it being adjacent, I think this would be an excellent game for.
Absolutely.
Um, you know, people who aren't completely diehard Euro, but probably more the middle between the narrative and the Euro style gamers. I think that works pretty well.
Okay.
And it's probably why it worked pretty well for me. I don't mind playing a Ameritrash or I really don't mind playing a narrative style game,
Hmm.
a storytelling game. But I'm definitely more of a Euro player. But you know, I can kind of sit in the middle. So what I really liked is what we talked about, the ability to upgrade that deck and to kind of Euro it a little bit. So if you've got, people who like that kind of mixture of things, I think with you bringing up like Ryan Lockett, um, I know Above and Below, I think you're kind of not the biggest fan of Above and Below, but
Yeah.
I think for people who would like Above and Below, I think this kind of works, kind of at the same level. There's a little bit of game there. Maybe the story isn't, overwhelming, or not overwhelming, but completely integral in the game.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like people who would like that game would probably like this game. I don't know. It's hard for me to characterize too much who the ideal gamer would be for this. Beyond that,
I'm pretty much on par with you. So I'm just going to kind of repeat or echo a lot of what you said. If you like first of all, if you're a gamer and you like cooperative games and you're a Lord of the Rings fan and you're willing to accept the fact that this is Lord of the Rings adjacent, meaning, again, like I said, you're not playing through any of the movies really. Just like Brad said, absolutely, you should invest the money, get a buddy of yours or a significant other or something, and play through the campaign. You'll probably enjoy it because you like cooperative games and you like Lord of the Rings. If you're a solo gamer, we've already kind of touched on that. I would probably not recommend this as a great solo game. There's some others that I could probably name drop that would be better to go through soloing. Seven Continent, and so that's who I wouldn't really recommend it to, is people that just want a like solo game. If you're not a Lord of the Rings fan, now that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm referring to someone that's like, I dislike that. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about someone who's like, I know Lord of the Rings exists. I remember when they were in the theater or something, you know what I mean? But I'm not a huge fan. I guess, Brad, that's kind of where you should chime in, maybe, because you're
yeah.
not, at being not a huge Lord of the Rings fan.
Well, right. And I go, okay, some of the names I know and some basic idea of who the characters are, and that works okay there. I really, are you into the fantasy type thing at all? Can you, but
Mm,
as far as the storyline, I think that's part of it. I never was a huge fantasy fan, but recently I've gotten into it a little bit more, as and with some books and things like that. So I think
yeah.
that probably helped quite a bit. But I would say if you're not a Lord of the Rings fan and you're not into the fantasy side of things at all, fantasy genre at all, then I would probably pass. Um, but that's my thought, I guess.
So you wouldn't recommend this to a buddy of yours that's not a Lord of the Rings fan?
Well, I would say if they're not also have some interest in the fantasy genre in some way, then I would say
Okay, so
probably
the
not.
genre is more important than the actual specific brand. What do you want to call it? IP?
IP, yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
if you like magic and wizards and fantasy stuff, maybe this would be within their wheelhouse, even if you're not into Lord of the Rings
yeah,
specifically.
I don't know. I guess that's where the theme is. How much of the fantasy part actually ties in is probably questionable too.
And how much of the Lord of the Rings theme ties into this too?
Right, yeah,
Because
probably,
like people said, you could re-scheme it. It doesn't have a huge Lord of the Rings feel to it. At least that's
yeah.
what people have said.
I guess I would probably fall back on is the style of game, not necessarily the theme of the game, something
Okay.
that you can work with.
Like an exploration game, a story game, or campaign game, whatever. Like those elements, probably. If you like those things, then maybe this would be one
Right.
that you would try. And even if you don't like Lord of the Rings, maybe it'll turn you on to Lord of the Rings. Maybe you would play this game. I know I mentioned to you after we've played this, it's like, Brad, you really need to watch these movies now. And I think you're probably more prone to watch them now after playing this game. I'm
Certainly.
putting
Yeah.
words in your mouth, but
Yeah.
um, so maybe it would help turn people on to Lord of the Rings and watch the movies and things like that. So, well, at this point, it seems like we're kind of just at a stalemate, going back and forth. That's all the bullet points that I had to really talk about for Lord of the Rings. I think for final thoughts, overall, I'd I'd give this pretty much akin to what Brad said. Out of 10, I'd give it somewhere between like a 7.5 to an 8, which is a pretty solid game according to the BGG stat ratings or whatever. So kind of both thumbs up or thumbs up from both of us if you want to check this game out. If we've said something about Lord of the Rings or something and you're like, ooh, that's me, I'm that type of gamer, you should definitely check it out and find it on Amazon. It's probably cheaper now than it's ever been, because it's a couple of years old now. And the app is a free download. So you will basically have to have some electronic device and enjoy your game. Find your significant other or your other Lord of the Rings nerd and play through the campaign. Hopefully you can make it to the end and win, unlike our campaign. So that's going to be it for this video. Again, as always, Brad, thank you for jumping on Zoom with me and talking about games.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So my name is Andrew Davidson. Thank you everyone out there for checking out our video as per my ability. If you like our content, if you like our videos, if you like games in general, please do us a favor, comment, like, subscribe, hit the little bell so that you get notifications when we post more videos. I heard if you hit the bell, you get 7 years good luck, which is always a good thing. And so that's it for me. I will see you guys all at the next video.